A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
One of those priceless conversations coming over this next hour where we get to explore an accurate snapshot of Australia's social fabric. And we're going to start today talking about something that's so close to home for every one of us, perhaps, new research that highlights just how satisfied we are with our salary at work. There's some new research that's found Australian workers are feeling a little more positive, and while nearly half are reporting improved feelings about their salaries, there are still lots who are finding it tough to set financial goals and grow their savings. Well, there's a lot of ground we can cover today as we explore attitudes to our work across the generations and an opportunity to talk about Australia's social fabric. Our special guest is sought after as a futurist and social commentator with an amazing grasp on trends around finance, technology, health, mining, energy and education. Our special guest this hour is McCrindle, leading social researcher, demographer and the founder of McCrindle Research. Mark, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thanks, Neil. Great to be with you.
Hey, Mark, there's so much going on, just hard to keep abreast of it all. And you've got research happening all the time and across all of those sorts of dimensions I was talking about. What if we do start with this issue that's so close to home for all of us, and that is our attitude to what our boss is paying us at work? What is this latest research showing us?
Well, as you said, Neil, salaries are going quite well, particularly relative to what we've had in the previous decade. There's been a bit of movement on salaries. The challenge for Australians is more on the cost side, their budgeting side, the expenditure side, rather than the earnings side. And particularly a new generation, in terms of their earnings, generation has a good opportunity for salary growth coming into right at the time that there's a workforce, retirements and, growth. So good opportunity for young people. The costs that they're spending are really the concern that's bringing the challenge to the household budgets.
When you're monitoring things, Mark, I guess this might be a year-to-year thing, and you do this as often as you've been doing it. You start to get a snapshot of what happens each year, and then you've got each decade, and then what's happened for this generation. So, what do we understand about trends when it comes to whether we're satisfied with the salary we're earning?
Well, it's certainly better than it was a decade ago, or in fact over the last decade, where people felt that that their salaries were pretty staid and they just weren't seeing that growth. What we have is an empowered workforce now that recognise that through upskilling and retraining, they can move forward on those salaries. They can future-proof their careers and move into areas where they can earn a bit more. The fastest growing earning type at the moment is the multiple job holder. So people don't even need to just rely on the one job. They can have another job, or what's often called the side hustle in a gig economy world. Some people can use some of those extra hours in their week to gain some extra earnings. So amidst the challenges of household budgets, Australians are ramping up the earnings side.
And when there's that little extra in the pay packet, I know that so many of us will be feeling the pinch when we're at the supermarket, or the rent is due again. It seems to come around so quickly. Or the mortgage, it just keeps on rising. We keep hearing of potential for some sort of mortgage rate relief, but it just doesn't seem to be there. The thought that even though we might be earning a little more and feeling a little bit better on payday, the fact that perhaps for a lot of us, that money is disappearing quicker than it's ever done before. That's got to be having some sort of social impact on the way we think about life. Are people positive, or are they negative, or how do you see things?
It is certainly creating some challenges around our sentiment at the moment, and that's a good summary of it, Neil. We have housing costs higher than they've ever been before, and the cost of maintaining a mortgage has never been greater. And with that, rental costs have never been a higher proportion of income. It used to be that if someone was spending 30% or more of their household earnings on either the rent or the mortgage, then they were in housing stress. Well, now that's the majority of the population of those moving into homes. have bought a new home in the last couple of years, they're spending more than half of their household earnings just to maintain that in terms of the mortgage costs. So that does weigh heavily on Australians, and half of, or 49% of Generation Z, those in their 20s, say they are worried about their financial future, compared to well under half, that just less than 1 in 5 of the baby boomers. So it seems that the younger generations, as they think about the future, either getting homes or paying those homes down, are far more worried than any of the other generations as they think to the long term.
You are the expert when it comes to generations, Mark. You've got baby boomers, and some will say not suffering as much because they've experienced some good times, and largely, and of course there are going to be exceptions, but even to the point of fueling inflation because they're just loving to spend. The younger generations, though, do they have to be more savvy in this day and age to be able to navigate the way forward? I think one of your research notes is that younger generations are pushing for salary negotiations, perhaps maybe more than other generations. How does that look?
Well, that's right. They are pretty empowered in that approach. They're what we call passive job seekers. So even though they've got a job, they're looking around to see what else is available. They are aware by simply typing something into a salary website, or indeed Googling it, what they might be earning. So they're always on the front foot in that sense. And where there are more jobs available than people to fill them, particularly in some professions, they're not afraid to step forward and have the conversation. On the positive side, though, and that might sort of cause a bit of alarm too, that they're sort of not afraid to constantly, ask for a raise, but they are prepared to get the negative feedback or the constructive feedback as well. They're saying that they're looking for that mentoring and that input so that they can shape their career and add the most value. The big discussion in Australia at the moment is productivity, and we can't have increases in earnings without the increases in productivity. And this is a generation, if ever there was one, that could utilise technology or AI or their ongoing education to shape the future of those businesses, to add more value, and then hopefully, earn a little bit more of the revenues.
As you say, and it might be younger generations that are more likely to just jump onto Google and find out what others who have their same skills are earning, and then the likelihood that they might not have the sort of loyalty that older generations might have felt to their employer. What is this saying about younger generations and the thought of job hopping?
Well, they are far more transient. They've got a shorter tenure in those roles than ever before, and are prepared to move more frequently. Our estimation for school leavers today is that they will have 18 separate jobs in their lifetime across 6 separate careers. So it's not just job for life anymore. There's far more change. And of course, if they're moving across 6 careers, that means a lot of retraining and career transitioning and learning. They're truly going to be those lifelong learners. And I think there's a lot of positives in that, to keep adding value, upskilling ourselves, thinking of where we can remain relevant, to make sure we're not caught in a dead-end pathway. But, there's a downside, I guess, compared to previous generations, because looking over the fence all the time is not the way to live, being envious of what others might be earning or worrying too much. As Jesus himself said, do not worry about tomorrow. So I think that they could perhaps learn from the others. But I think with the older generations, while take the baby boomers, for example, are lower in earnings than the younger generation, these Gen Zs in their 20s and now Generation Y in their 30s are the highest earning of all of the generations. In a cash flow or earnings perspective, they've got the lowest wealth of all of the generations because they are taking a little bit later in life to get into property. So the baby boomers might have eased out on the earnings, but they are 20% of the population owning more than 50% of Australia's national private wealth. So they've got an economic footprint way larger than their demographic footprint, and it's the highest proportion of private wealth ownership that any generation has ever had. So, the grandparents of today certainly have done a lot better over the last 50 years in particularly their homes and property, than the younger generation are able to do.
I want to hear your heartbeat, Mark, on where things are going and, what to expect if you're a boomer, what to expect if you're Gen X or a millennial or Gen Z or even the Alpha generation, what to expect. And
life, culture and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 with Neil Johnson on Vision.
Mark McCrindle is our guest, leading social researcher, demographer and the founder of McCrindle Research. Our talkback line is open on 1800 316 316 to join in our conversation. We're talking about what lies ahead, what makes us satisfied, the salaries we're earning. There's a cost of living crisis that's taking with one hand what we're earning with the other. You might have your own thoughts to be able to present in our conversation today on 1800 316 316. Mark, let me ask you, perhaps, beneath the statistics, making sense of those, getting into some of maybe the deeper waters around what this means for different generations, about how satisfied we might be with the changes that you've been talking about, this research is showing, because my suspicion is there's going to be something of a Christian dimension where we can actually talk about, the way our response is to our work and our life and our money. How do you reflect on satisfaction with our jobs and our work?
Well, it's a great question, Neil. I think firstly, work can't just be about salary, and we've got to decouple work from earnings, because there is far more to work, as we all know, than just what we earn. And if we're just forever chasing where I can earn an extra, few dollars an hour or more in a pay packet, we'll probably end up dissatisfied, because there's always people that are going to earn more. There's always more we would want, and we can never fill that yearning. And of course, we're created by God for work. We serve a God who works, and work, of course, is before the fall. It's not a result of the fall. Even in the Garden of Eden, there was work, the naming of animals and the like. And I think that if we can recognize work is not the same as employment, work is our contributions. It's how we most make a difference and an impact. It's where we can connect with other people. It's where we can grow our skills and use our gifts and just steward the days and the time we have. Then all of us are working, even after we've left employment. As retirees, perhaps there's still work. Those that are raising children are still, of course, working. That very noble work of raising children and households. Those that are volunteering are working. So I think it's important we recognize that work is not just employment. And even if we think about work that's a job, we found in our research that, yes, to some people, work is simply a job and they're exchanging time for money. But to so many more, it's a lifeline to social interaction, to purpose, and to a place of belonging. And our latest research is showing that that's exactly what young people are looking for, a job that really helps them thrive in those broader dimensions.
I love the way you're able to reflect on what might be a biblical Christian dimension around these things with our work. And sometimes I get the impression that when we're talking about success as a Christian believer, of someone who takes God at his word, that sometimes you might feel as though when we start to talk about social responsibility and such things, that might be hosing down the ambition that some might have to succeed in business or to climb that corporate ladder. Is there anything you can reflect on that comes around the Christian heartbeat in what it is to succeed in today's world?
Yeah, well, firstly, as we read in the New Testament, we work as unto the Lord, not unto others. Our ultimate boss, the one who gives us the job and the opportunity and the gifts indeed and the very days to invest, is our Lord. And so he is the one that we serve. And I think if we get that priority right and see the use of our skills and gifts towards greater impact and flourishing in our own lives, but the lives of others, that's important. We work so that we can earn, so that we can provide for our family, also so we can support ministry or other people, so we have more than we need to indeed help those who aren't as fortunate. And these are all historic Christian messages and indeed biblical ones. But the exciting thing, when we ran this research and we asked young people in their 20s, what are you looking for in a job? What determines whether you take that career? The top 5 things were not at all to to do with money. Number one was having purpose and meaning in work. And how encouraging that is. If we can find a job where we're loving it, I know, Neil, you love your role and I love mine, then as the old saying goes, you never work a day in your life because you're doing what you've got purpose and meaning in. And number two, for young people today, the second most important thing was work that aligns with their core values. So in other words, they said, I'm not going to take a job working for, I don't know, a tobacco company or an alcohol or gambling institution, even if it pays more, because it doesn't resonate with my values. And this was a mainstream survey of 20-somethings. They said the values of the organization matters. Number three was a workplace that's a community of strong social connections. In other words, they want to work in a place where their colleagues can help them in the social aspect of life, because we're not probably, your average Australian at least is not a part of a local community club or a membership organisation. They don't know their neighbours as well. So where are they getting the social belonging from? We would say hopefully the church is there, hopefully ministries are there, but it's actually the workplace. So a community of strong social connections. The last two in the top five were work they do has a positive impact on the world around them. So they want to leave the world a better place. They don't just want to exchange time for money. And number five was workplace flexibility. So that's maybe a bit of work from home or maybe some flexibility of hours so they can do those other aspects of life. But you see what they're saying. It's purpose and meaning. It's core values. It's a community of connection. It's positive impact on the world, and it's flexibility. And I mean, we all want that. And I just found that very encouraging, that it's not just about job security or money or success, but it's about those deeper things, even for this next generation.
And that workplace culture, and no doubt there's been changes through the generations. What I can hear your heartbeat here is that if you want to keep a great, strong workforce, you've got to work on your workplace culture. No doubt our Christian faith speaks very heavily and very positively into making that workplace culture work so well. And of course, you get great employees who are happy in their workplace, and there's some biblical foundation there for your ongoing success in what you do. I imagine that good management, good workplace culture, that's the sort of thing that you'd be talking to leaders about.
Exactly right. It's so important to have, because as you said there, Neil, your leaders create that culture. They shape that culture. Now, we all have a role to play in that culture, but it does flow from the top down. So if the leaders have clear purpose and meaning as they talk about the organisation, if they've got values that resonate through, if they walk their talk and lead with authenticity, that's going to create that culture of engagement, of passion, of commitment. And so it becomes a focus not on productivity and earnings and bonuses, but on values, on flourishing, and on organisational alignment. And that's of course the stuff of leaders.
We've been talking about work a lot, Mark, and I wonder if we're talking about work and succeeding. Just recently, though, you were a part of the National Prayer Breakfast in Canberra, and you began to unpack some of the things that are coming, some of those things that perhaps those who are in the Christian community are particularly interested in. But one of those was our barriers to connection and the way we long for connection, and this is changing generationally. What can you share with us?
Well, that's right, Neil. Loneliness is a real thing. Hard on the heels of the health pandemic, of the COVID pandemic, we had a silent pandemic of people feeling isolated. And partly that's because all of the rhythms of gathering and connection were stopped for a period, and a lot of people didn't get back into that. A lot of people have lost that sense of community and connection and engagement over the last few years. And we surveyed Australians and found that 59%, more than half, say they often or sometimes feel lonely. But as we filtered across by generation, we found it was higher the younger you went. So for the younger generation, 71% said that they often or sometimes feel lonely, much higher than the 59% nationally. So those in their 30s and their 20s were the most likely to say that they experience loneliness. In fact, 17% of Australians said that they have never felt part of a community. They've never felt that sense of belonging. Almost 1 in 5 of us. And I think there's a real tragedy there. Mateship is such an Australian characteristic. On Remembrance Day, we remember that as a key value of those Anzacs and indeed those that have served. It's the mateship, it's the camaraderie that is so important. It's as Jesus said, the laying down of one's life for one's friend is core on Remembrance Day, and Jesus, the exemplar of that and of community and connection and belonging. But Australians as a whole aren't feeling that, and that has become even more of a challenge over the last few years.
Is some of this around the changes that have been happening around our use of the latest technologies? We're all victims of being on our screens too often, cutting down our personal connections. Is that something connected to the sense of belonging you're talking about?
It sure is. Right at the time that we've got the highest use of screen engagement, right at the time that social media is at its height, we've got this isolation, this loneliness, this disconnection. And so it seems that in some ways we've facilitated our social life, our connection with others through the device, through the digital. And while there's some degree to which social media can be social, for a lot of people it's actually antisocial, and for young people particularly. So it hasn't really given us that community, that belonging, that authenticity that we are created for. The other aspect that's risen here is even being disconnected from those traditional social bottlenecks in our society. And one of those is work. There's a big focus on work from home, on remote work, which is great for convenience factors, but particularly for young people. If their whole work life is work from home, is work remotely, then they're not getting what for many is a key connection point, which is a workplace with others where you're aligned and together. It's a community of purpose as you achieve those workplace goals together. We found that 70% of Australian workers said it's the workplace where they most experience regular and meaningful connection. And if we've got a whole generation growing up working from home, then they're going to miss out on that and further heighten that loneliness experience.
Is this sort of isolation you're talking about almost an opportunity for those spiritual conversations, those spiritual connections? Because I guess for people working from home, if you're feeling isolated in your work, then somehow or other connecting with a body of believers on a weekend might be the answer you're looking for. Is there some sort of opportunity there?
There sure is, and this is something that we know as churchgoers is that real community happens at our churches because we've got firstly that vertical relationship with God, and from there we have this horizontal relationship with each other. It should be and often is a model community because all are welcome. It's not a commercial arrangement. People might connect in a workplace, but that's about employment and salaries. People might connect as a member of an organization, but they're paying membership dues, or maybe they're a customer. But church is open for all, and it's a key gathering point, and it's got the alignment, the purpose, and the connection, and ultimately, that important faith foundation which unites and is supreme. But we have a lot of our population who aren't connected there, and yet we think that they don't want those spiritual conversations, particularly young people. But this data found the opposite. We asked Australians, are you open to having a spiritual conversation with someone that may involve different views than your own? And the older generation, the baby boomers in their 60s and 70s, about 1 in 3 said, yeah, I'm open to that. But, most sort of aren't as open. They've sort of worked out what they believe in life. And by the time you move all the way through to the youngest generation, they were much more likely, more than half, 53% of Generation Z in their teen and 20-something years said they're extremely or very open to having spiritual conversations. So probably if conversations aren't happening, it's not that they're not interested, it's that we're not engaging, that we're not starting them. Far from being a generation that's closed to faith or spirituality or religion, it's a generation open to having the conversations if we'll only step out there and start one.
We'll come back to some of this, but let me just divert us into what some might think this is a whole different direction, but all the changes that are upon us, Mark. And there's going to be changes too in every individual and every family environment that we're speaking into today here on Vision. But the technology changes, artificial intelligence, robots either taking our jobs or making our lives easier. When you reflect on the major change that's happening now, almost revolutionary change, is there something we can reflect on to help us make sense of where we are in the context of what's going on?
Yeah, well, certainly, technology and AI particularly has been transformative over the last year and a bit. It was probably at the start of last year that most people started first time hearing about ChatGPT, this generative AI platform. And now there are many of those, of course, but it really is new in the last couple of years for most people. And yet already we've got 1 in 5 young workers using generative AI in their work on a daily basis. And about the same number interact as a customer seamlessly with these chatbots or AI-generated outcomes. In other words, the playlist or the search suggestions, even perhaps interacting to find a solution in a customer sense with a chatbot rather than speak to someone in a call center. That's what the majority of Generation Z in their 20s say that they do. So we've got a particularly younger generation coming through using a new technology at a whole new level in a short period of time, and that's AI. I think that we don't need to be overly concerned, though. While there's always an outlier use of technology in negative ways, and we talked about social media and some of the problems, or clearly some of the unsavory aspects of the internet is not always positive. Generally, as humans, we find technology and use it in a way that empowers human flourishing and connection. I think AI will do that. It will help on some of the productivity. It will help remove some of the drudgery of work, and it will help us connect and bring about some better outcomes. Now, we do have to manage its use, but we've certainly got a new generation that are clear-eyed in its space and what it will do and what it won't do, and certainly it's being interacted with more in a workplace and in a customer base than ever before.
Sometimes as Christians and as churches, the accusation is there, we're dragged kicking and screaming into the new change that's coming. With all of the things that are upon us so far as the technology changes, is there something that you encourage people to do to prepare for what's coming, so that you're not the ones being left behind, that you're actually going to be the head and not the tail, above and not beneath, as we often like to say those sorts of words. What do you do in your own heart and mind to prepare for the changes that are upon us?
Well, I think it's important, Neil, that we do keep an eye on these changes because, we want to utilize the best technology in our roles, in our ministries, in our churches, and in our world. If you look at the Apostle Paul, and he was always using the latest technology. Roman roads had transformed the first century and allowed the spread of all sorts of messages, but he used that for the spread of the gospel. You look at intercontinental shipbuilding that allowed greater transport and faster transport again in the first century, and Paul was on those ships and using that for good purposes. And even Common Greek, Koine Greek as it was, had connected disparate nations in the Roman Empire, and Paul used that language again for gospel purposes. So I think if he was around today, he would be using the latest communication technologies, whether that be perhaps social platforms or digital technologies, maybe apps and vision radio. You do that so well, Neil, with having it on the device, and increasing our understanding of the Bible or our connection with others through these devices and technologies. What a great opportunity is. So I don't think we need to be fearful of it. I think we need to redeem the technology and use it for its great impact. But keep one other thing in mind, and that is that even in the future, the most valuable skills will be distinctively human ones. Anything that we can outsource to technology, we will. But what we can't get technology to do, what it's not good at doing, is connecting with others, communicating effectively, bridging gaps, reaching out to those in need, and leading and communicating effectively. So I would encourage young people, or indeed all of us, to keep developing those people skills, because 100 years ago we had technologies, and 100 years' time, if the Lord tarries, there'll be new technologies. But what will be constant is the human interaction and that human social connection that we're designed for. So develop the human skills as well as keeping an eye on the technology skills to remain future-proofed.
And no doubt, when it comes to those connections, there's some other dimensions too, and fear and anxiety. And some of that comes around all these latest technological developments. When we were talking about belonging and that necessity that people are having, their openness to even spiritual conversations, and then taking that a little deeper into fear and anxiety and some of the things that are changing and impacting us globally. I wondered whether you might have had any sort of thought there with change that's on its way, both here in Australia and afoot overseas, and what that's doing to the way we're thinking about life for the future.
Yeah, certainly there is a lot of anxiety around. And interestingly, we were just saying that technology is going to have a big impact in the future, but it doesn't define the future. And then it failed on us. And that's, I think, typical as to why we can't rely on technology as the future alone. You know, it's the people-centric nature of things. It's those timeless needs and human drivers that are foundational. And I think even when we look at the geopolitics of our world, when we look at economic uncertainties, and for others it's maybe changing technology, or it's emerging job markets, or it's just shifts even from a political or environmental perspective. People do have worries out there, and I think what's important firstly is to look at what we can control and where we can have an impact, and focus on that. I think it's to look at the emerging generation who will bring some solutions to these things as well. A lot of people say to me in our research, well, I'm not sure how to engage with the changing customer demands, or there's new technologies, new expectations. And my question is, well, who said you've got to come up with all the answers? You know, that's why we've got a multitude of generations, and the younger ones are often closer to the new technologies, the changes than we might be. And that's why when we have a diversity of generations and perspectives in bringing forth solutions, we can come up with some more holistic outcomes. It's also recognizing that change is just the reality. It's always been thus, and so there's nothing to worry about in that regard. I like the focus we see in Psalm 78, which just says, from generation to generation, we will tell the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his wonders and the power he has, so the next generation will know them. In other words, there's always change, there's always shifts, there's always uncertainties. But if we can engage with that next generation, equip and empower them, share the truth with them, they'll carry the baton on in their era and amongst their cohort and in their times. And that's what we have through history. And I think there's an encouragement in that.
I wonder if you've got any thoughts on our ability to embrace change. If you think of, say, boomers as the wealthy generation, maybe resistant to any change because, hey, we've had it pretty good and let's keep it as it is. Let's not make too much change here. But if you're in those younger generations, and ones we've been talking about through this hour, because change is upon us, is there something in that younger heart mindset that says we want to embrace the change, we need to learn all about it, and we need to, we need to attack this with some vigor rather than let it take us by surprise?
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, if we think about the average Australian life expectancy at birth is about 84 years. And so if we think about that span of life that God might graciously give to us, where is the center point of that? For older people, most of their life has been lived. And so they're looking back to the past, and that's where their gravity is, that's where their focus is, that's where their reference point is. But obviously for younger people that are starting out in life, the bulk of their years are yet to be lived. They're in the future. And so that's where their focal point is, what's next and what's to come. And their orientation is around things that haven't yet happened. And that's why I think as older people, we can sometimes be prone to look back, and younger people are looking forward. And I think that's why the strength comes with those different perspectives. But it's also why perhaps sometimes as we live more of life, we have greater experience, greater stability, greater sense, having lived through a few cycles of ups and downs, a greater sense of confidence that, hey, this too will pass. But also we can be a little reluctant to want to make changes because we're relying on the years that we know, the years we have lived. Younger people are always wanting to shake things up and say, hey, that's the old stuff, but now we're ready for a new era. And that's sometimes what they bring. But the downside that younger people have is an anxiety and uncertainty because they haven't faced these things before, whereas older people have been through different cycles before. So I think the strength comes in dealing with anxiety as we get younger people on board because they can bring creative solutions. We get older generations in the mix because they bring a sense of, hey, this will pass. These are just the cycles, the changes that we have. And I think together we come up with better solutions and a greater confidence of what's to come as well.
Well, Mark McCrindle, a special honour to you because in your expanding organisation, which is just amazing, as a social researcher, demographer, the founder of McCrindle Research and continuing to grow, I always appreciate that you've got this dimension to what you do, which takes into account the religious fabric of Australian society. And you've got all sorts of research that's very valuable for Christians and for people who are leaders in their local church. And I'll point listeners to the McCrindle.com website where you might be able to track down some of the visual graphics that might help you just to make sense of things and even to be able to use in church life. But Mark, you also have some virtual events that will be very useful to listeners today. One coming up on the 28th of November. What are you exploring in that one?
We're looking at the top trends that are emerging right at the moment, and there's demographic trends as our population grows, and we work out how to cope with the infrastructure, through to some social trends and changing attitudes and expectations, and obviously those generational changes that we've discussed as well. There are technology trends and there are emerging consumer trends. And so we're going to look at a big snapshot of that all in 1 hour on a virtual event. People can go to McCrindle.com to get more information, and we'd welcome anyone to join this event or any of our events, and there's a lot of, as you said, resources freely accessible on our website as well.
Well, Mark, always a pleasure and a privilege to be able to get it straight from the horse's mouth. The founder of McCrindle Research, Mark McCrindle. Mark, thank you so much for taking some time to share these thoughts and your insights and your heart with listeners today on 2020.
Oh, thanks so much, Neil. It was a great delight.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.